Hello and welcome. Before we begin, we'd like to take a brief moment to share an important disclaimer. The views, opinions, and statements expressed on the Rascals Lounge podcast are solely those of the host and guests and do not reflect the views of any organization, employer, or sponsor. This podcast is provided as is and is intended solely for informational and entertainment purposes. Discussions on this podcast may include topics such as politics, vaccines, the pharmaceutical industry, professional sports, esports professionals and organizations, content creators, music, medicine, law, science, psychology, herbal medicine, supplements, cannabis, nicotine, alcohol, religious leaders, faith-based beliefs, and other related subjects. All commentary is based on publicly available information, personal experience, or personal opinion. Any references to public figures, political parties, politicians, athletes, organizations, religious groups, or individuals, living or deceased, are opinion-based and are not intended as factual claims or statements that could harm reputations. No content on this podcast is meant to defame, discredit, or negatively impact the reputation of any person, group, political party, religious faith, or entity. The host and guests expressly disclaim all liability for defamation, libel, slander, or any misinterpretation of the views expressed. This podcast does not provide professional advice of any kind. Comments or discussions involving doctors, scientists, psychologists, attorneys, athletes, religious leaders, politicians, or other professionals, including those related to health, training, injuries, performance, the pharmaceutical industry, herbal remedies, supplements, cannabis, nicotine, alcohol, vaccines, or alternative treatments, are intended for general informational purposes only. Listeners should never start, stop, or alter any medication, treatment plan, religious practice, legal action, financial decision, or substance use based solely on content heard on this podcast. Always consult with a licensed professional or qualified advisor in the relevant field before making any decisions related to health, law, religion, finance, or lifestyle. The host and guests make no representations or warranties regarding the accuracy, completeness, or suitability of the information presented, and disclaim all responsibility for errors, omissions, or outcomes resulting from the use of this content. The podcast and its content are provided as is, without any express or implied warranties of any kind. By listening to, reading, or otherwise accessing this podcast, you acknowledge and agree that the Rascals Lounge podcast, including its host and guests, shall not be held liable for any interpretations, actions, or consequences resulting from the content of this program. We strongly encourage all listeners to think critically, do their own research, and form independent judgments before acting on any topic discussed. Listener discretion is advised. Thank you and enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Rascals Lounge podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Rascals Lounge podcast. Well, today we got a special guest. Guys, this guy is special and he's going to bring in some interesting information. So I have with us Nick Petosky. Nick, how's it going, man?
Hey, it's going all right. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, pleasure. Nick, can you just briefly tell our listeners what is it, the line of work you do? What is it you do? And a little bit of your bio.
Absolutely. I'm an anonymous investigative, I won't say journalist. I really feed research and data to people that are in the health freedom movement directly, meaning clinical studies, collections of data related to whatever it is they're engaged in, debating on, whatnot. So as far as work, because having these political opinions is a danger to your well-being and to your career, I do have to do this work anonymously. So Nick Petosky is my Mark Twain. But when I get up and put on my jacket and go to work, I'm working at a public health agency. So I am directly in connection with the programs, the policies, the guidance, and certainly hands-on to the science and the technology that is kind of the big backbone between your state department and the federal health agencies. I've been doing this for about 30 years, and I have a couple areas of specialty in my research as a medical anthropologist. One of them is a large program that ran for 17 years in the 60s and 70s. It was called the Special Virus Cancer Program, and that dovetails into another domain, and that is vaccine contamination. I've studied that very carefully, and I'm not talking about making arguments about the root causes of things. I'm talking about going to the pathology papers, going to the regulator papers, and learning what was known about contaminants and risk to human health decades ago, while the use of those risky materials continued. So that's a little bit about me.
Wow. That's deep. So basically, you're you're a scientist, I would say, right? Is it more
I'm a
like
researcher. I'm a
you're
researcher. I will
you're a
always
researcher?
defer to, someone who
Okay.
does bench science,
Uh,
someone who does DNA sequencing or assays or testing or protocols in the lab. I started into that track some years ago, but the questions that I asked, earned me a boot in the face. So I took on a more of a public health track versus a clinical or laboratory track, and that served me well.
did you study chemistry for this? Quick disclaimer, we're not doctors, and this isn't medical advice. The opinions shared here are personal and not to be taken as facts. Don't start, stop, or change any meds without talking to your licensed healthcare provider. Always follow trusted sources like the CDC, WHO, and FDA.
Along the way, you're having to learn
Okay.
chemistry, entomology, virology, basic microbiology, genetics. You have to pick up competencies across different swim lanes. This is an interesting phenomena. A lot of people who will talk about science will immediately put up a lane line, a boundary, and say, well, that's not my area of expertise, but, and then they offer their opinion. A medical anthropologist has to make sense of and reconcile what different stories about public health and science and disease have said over the years. We have to vet and compare multiple sources about the same data point in a method of reconciling it, checking to see what was truth and what might have just been a narrative. But yeah, chemistry is definitely mixed in there.
And that's very complex. Now, I seen some of the stuff that you sent me and I was looking into and I was very interested in the soursop because I even drink soursop tea and and there's things that I was looking into the documents how soursop actually fights cancer. And when was this kind of like discovered? Was this discovered like many years ago? Or was this just something that just came about like not long ago and it
Let's
was
let's
just put
talk
out?
about let's talk about your heritage, and I mean back to the old country. Where do your ancestors hail from?
Mine Puerto Rico.
Hmm? And is there a body of natural health medicine there in Puerto Rico, meaning an understanding of things to avoid, things to take during certain illnesses or disorders, things that you should just eat regularly, which will help stave off things like parasites? Isn't there a natural, understanding, an integrated health system, in PR?
Yes. I mean, well, a lot of people use a lot of, what they call old remedies, they use a lot. People get sick. Oh, well, my grandfather used to take the peels of oranges and dry them
Mhm,
out and save them. And then if you get
mhm.
sick, he'll clean it up, boil it, and serve you as a tea, and you'll be good like in within days. I mean, 2 days, I mean, you're just good.
Yeah, yeah. So, when you ask about when was soursop discovered, the reason that I take that little side journey is to, pay homage to all of the medical cultures, I'll say, that have emerged around the world. We can now call that integrated medicine. If you go to a doctor that will actually pay attention to, uh, acupuncture and herbal remedies from multiple countries, and diet, things like that. You can immediately recognize that they are holistic or integrated in their approach to care. They don't just go to one volume, and that's Western allopathy. So coming back to soursop, you may have seen other plant therapies or plant medicines. They're also known as phytoceuticals. In that collection. And the point of when were they discovered? Well, when did the first person that was at risk for cancer start consuming that plant? We just don't have the data on that. And
Mm,
most of our now emerging miracle plants. Eat these seeds, eat this tea, have this tea, yada, yada, that's being presented in large part by we'll say, blossoming practitioners of integrated medicine, Western doctors who have recently, they want to be second to be first, right? They have come forward and said, "Oh well, this is an interesting study," and they will always lean, it seems, on whether or not a journal article has given it light, given it oxygen. And then they will say, "Hey, here is this seed. Look at papaya seeds. Look at, whatever the phytoceutical would be," and they begin cracking the door open. Where in cultures around the world there have been well characterized, practiced, and refined phytoceutical practices that have gone on for centuries. So you're seeing things. Just think of it like like a potato in the boiling water. It's been to the surface before, it's been there a long time, and it's just now bobbing back up. It's now the popular thing for people to talk about soursop. But these regionalized areas of insight to phytoceutical science and medicine have persisted for a long time. And believe me, the Western scientists certainly have gone out and farmed all of the native cultural phytoceutical science. That's why they go and visit. Oh, you've seen all those pictures of a couple of white guys with pith helmets standing there with the native community and holding something, a flower, a plant, and talking about the native medicine, very interesting, crude medicine, and they disparage, uh, you know, the technology of that community, the Western acclimatization of that community. But boy, they're sure interested in their plant science. And then they bring samples and seeds back to their labs, back to their universities, and they do papers and they publish and they become renowned for this thing that they've drawn out of, the rough nature of those crude societies. I'm being very sarcastic here, people, because I have a real frustration with what Western medicine, and that includes Europe, that includes the World Health Organization, has done, both in usurping plant medicine from native communities and also introducing, we'll say, iatrogenic risk. That means an injury or a fatality that is triggered by a medical encounter. And I'm talking about vaccines.
Wow, that's wild. Yeah, yeah, that's so true because I have seen pictures of I don't know if they're scientists or what or who, holding the acai berries. Seen this article, like, all the benefit this berry could do, and one of the things that it kinda, like, got me thinking, I'm like, "Okay, if this is so good, why the pills that you see, the supplements, is never approved by the FDA?" I'm like, "Wait 1 second. You said it's good, but then it's not approved from the FDA. What's going on here?" And it always gets me thinking because when you really research and go deep onto these uh, supplements, these herbal medicines, they actually do really good for you. And then, but it never gets approved. But then again, you see that the industry kind of like takes some of their ingredients off of these plants and then keeps it for
Hmm?
themselves. And I'm like, okay,
Hmm.
but now I'm getting really confused here.
Okay, well,
What
well,
is
there
going
there are
on?
two pieces there. Let's talk about the Rockefeller, the era of Rockefellers in medicine, science, and capturing our regulatory agencies like the FDA. Over a century ago, just over a century ago, the Rockefeller clan, which was not that large at the time yet, but they were accumulating wealth, one of the wealthiest families in the world, decided that they wanted to capture Western medicine. We're talking primarily about the United States. These people, the Rockefeller Institute, the Rockefeller University, there's now a huge network of their entities, legal bodies in different spaces, permeated everything. Education, federal medicine and science regulatory agencies, the the universities that teach doctors what they do and don't know when they're standing in front of you during an encounter, and they took over all of it. I'm not going to try to summarize that for the show here. It's really a thread that listeners either are already aware of, or they can very easily go back. And so we're talking about 1917. We're not talking about something that happened in the last few years. Go back and look at how they took over public health, science, medicine, prescriptive medicine,
Mm,
and many aspects that they still have, a clutch on today. So that's how you can look to the FDA expecting it to do what it appears to be. It's a cop for public health, right? That's our interpretation of it. There's people in there, there's specialists in there, and all they do is make sure that there's no toxins in our food. They make sure to ban things, like you can go to California and see all the things that have the 65 cancer warning on them, all kinds of products. But then, oops, they actually don't. Instead, they allow products into the market that cause addiction, that have
mm,
horrible side effects, that don't ever actually cure the root cause. All it is a big clown parade of chasing after your symptoms. That's called symptomology. So that's a big piece of why we're getting these mixed messages, and it's creating what we call cognitive dissonance. You see the FDA and the CDC in a certain amount of assumption. You just assume that it's going to do certain things and it's going to act with a certain morality and under a certain charge. But you are witnessing throughout your entire life contradictions to that perception. They're still telling everybody in very simplified, dumbed down public health guidance, this is bad, this is good, all of that sort of just homogenous parental guidance. But they don't tell you this is how we came to that conclusion. These are the studies that contradicted our findings, but you know what? We're really in the pockets of pharma. So we're not going to tell you about, the goji berries. We're not going to tell you about soursop. We're certainly not going to tell you about simple things for anti-inflammation like ginger, increasing raw ginger intake as a benefit to controlling your body-wide inflammation. They're not going to emphasize things that cannot be monetized. That's the other side of it. It all ties into control, but control with a equity pathway. They want you to go to a doctor in a white coat. When that doctor says, "Do you know what, Jeff? Hang on a second. Let me go back to my computer. Let me go back and search a couple things on this. I'll be right back." He takes some notes. He leaves the exam room. Do you know what he's doing back in his office? Have you ever had this conversation about what doctors are referring to today? Do you know?
no, I think
Okay.
they go in a computer and they put on some information and try to figure out, uh, what type of medication they're gonna give you.
Yeah, this was brought to me by a career ER doctor. She does nothing but dire trauma, right? I mean,
Mhm.
you walk in,
Yeah.
gunshot wound, broken leg, acute disease presentation, heart attack, stroke. I mean, that's her day to day. And she brought this knowledge to me just a couple years ago. Not that surprising, but the implications are huge. Doctors go to a globally unified data bank called Up to Date. That sounds pretty simple and innocuous, doesn't it? And the principle, I mean, the name of it, oh, up to date, it's the latest stuff, it's the good stuff. They're trained to go in and begin plugging in your symptomology just like you shop for something in a wizard. You're like, do you want a 2-pack? Or an 8-pack? Do you want blue,
Mm.
white, or gray? It's like an Amazon wizard, basically. And it brings them through a very limited decision tree to a prescription termination point. Your patient has eczema, prescribe X. It's all about pairing your symptoms with a product that doctor is going to get a financial reward for prescribing. built-in conflict of interest, minimal examination of your presentation beyond simple matching. If you have a symptom that matches one of the categories that they're clicking in the little boxes, it'll bring them through the decision tree to say, oh, you've got gastroenteritis, whatever. And then they follow the instructions in Up to Date. That is not to say that a medical degree isn't difficult to acquire. And that is not to say that there are clinicians out there of many different levels and stripes around, the Western world and beyond. But this is a global resource. You can look Up to Date and go see it yourself. You can't get in unless you're a doctor. But I will say this is not a condemnation of allopathic clinicians. It's unfortunately a set of training wheels that they've strapped on, most of them, that they
Yeah.
can't get off. Also, think about the insurance. If you go in with a handful of papers about your interesting presentation, say you have an autoimmune problem, and no one has ever really been able to fix it for you, you just keep getting referred and referred and referred. Maybe a rheumatologist, maybe an immunologist, maybe an allergist, but nobody, they run tests, they poke your arm, take blood, they, and make notes, but nothing really gets fixed ever, besides that they ask you maybe to drink a corticosteroid. And then you open up that corticosteroid white paper and it says, if you consume this regularly, you will risk giving yourself cancer. That's the medicine you're given for an autoimmune inflammatory condition. Imagine that you're in that space and you go to your doctor and you said, you know what? All of that stuff hasn't worked. I've done some reading about my condition and I have found some um, ideas, some therapies that have been studied and have shown to be statistically significant for the patients. It's not just a fluke or an anecdote, as many scientists like to say, to disregard your evidence. Oh, that's just an anecdote. Well, it's my life. I live inside this anecdote. So, you can take your anecdote very seriously. But if you walk into your doctor prepared like that, with material that supersedes that little simplified decision tree on the Up to Date website, they may not know what to do. And insurance, if you say, you know what, I'd like red light therapy, I'd like pulsed electromagnetic frequency sessions to treat my cancer instead of surgery, chemotherapy, or radiation. You could come in with a documented, studied therapy, and they may balk or they may refuse to prescribe for you because not only does their prescriptive track restrict them from considering that, but the insurance won't pay for it.
That is so true. You know what's really wild? I mentioned this on previous episode I had with Dr. Margaret. My grandmother had breast cancer, and they removed both of her breasts, and she had to take chemo. She only did one chemo. She said she almost died.
Yep.
She stopped. When she went back home to Puerto Rico, I told her, Grandma, go to this place that, they sell natural remedies and supplements and all this stuff. So she was seen by a specialist over there, and he gave her these bottles. I was trying to get the name of the bottles, these natural supplement, so I could talk to you about it. But they were $500 a bottle. It's all
Okay.
natural. You know what?
Okay.
The doctor told me they only given her 8 months to a year to live. When she went over there, she got this medication, this supplement, natural supplement. She took it. She said it, obviously it heat up her body. And the doctor over there, he was like not in for the chemo, nothing. He said, this is a natural chemo. She
Mhm.
took it. She lived for over 15 years and she didn't die of cancer.
Way to go, Grandma. Awesome.
She didn't die of cancer. Obviously, the family had to pitch in, but I'm like, wait one second. If this is working, It doesn't get approved by the FDA, and then and what you were going back to what you were saying with this medications that you take, but then on the other hand, there's some side effects. You even see it in the commercials. How can it be possible that it says, well, if you have depression, take this medication, side effects, suicide.
Mhm.
I'm like, wait 1 second. I'm depressed and I'm going to take a medication that's going to give me thoughts of suicidal thoughts. What the heck? It doesn't make sense.
Oh, and you should probably use their, overeducated vernacular for that. Instead of saying suicidal or wanting to kill yourself, you say suicidal ideation. That's how they put a cold academic wrapper around, that horrible struggle that veterans and kids and a lot of people deal with, struggling with an impulse that my life and the things that are overwhelming me are are unpassable. I can't continue to carry the burden or face them or feel like I'm on fire from my trauma. Like, I was telling you about that ER doc. She's a veteran, and we talk about a little about her work in helping veterans that are struggling with PTSD.
Mhm.
And she's doing a project that is involving I am so angry at the term alternative because that was invented by the Rockefeller PR machine to call everything that was an existing therapy alternative. It's alternative. It's holistic. It's naturopathic. Though they used to just be called medicines or therapies, but they have tried to usurp those words for themselves, put a capital letter at the front like it's a copyrighted word for their product line, and it isn't. And I'm going to continue to break that down. But uh, I don't want to go too far off track into talking about her work, but she's doing fantastic work. Extremely, I would say, spiritual work. Like she has healed a lot of her own trauma. She was a medevac surgeon. If you can
Mm.
imagine the environment of being for your entire work shift only saving lives of people who have just been in a war theater injury, you can imagine the severity, and trying to save them as you are flying back to a base hospital. That's what she did in her service. And she
Mm.
resolved, she is such a wonderful, like a calm lake, very, very, she can get passionate. She has feelings, but she's not someone who demonstrates that she is suffering from that trauma anymore. And she's helping other vets. But all of that is happening outside of prescribed medications. Coming back to medications with side effects, suicidal ideation.
Mhm.
Let's talk about depression for a minute.
Mhm.
Tell me, what do you think depression is caused by?
Well, far what I've been reading and researching depression, sometimes it could be a chemical imbalance, what I'm been told allegedly is a chemical imbalance, um, that's in some certain liquids, in your brain. Um, that's what all I know with depression. I mean, I've gone through depression myself,
Okay.
but it
Was it tied to real life, trauma that you were having a hard time processing, or was it
oh,
just from a
it
general
was it
hopelessness?
was it was a divorce that I went through, and I didn't want to go through a divorce, but it was that moment, we had to go separate ways. I didn't eat. I lost weight dramatically. I slept throughout the day. And I mean, I just had no reason to even get up. I just to eat, not even hardly eat, shower and go back to sleep. It was horrible.
Is hopelessness an accurate
Oh
word?
man, it was just the worst thing, and your mind is running 1,000 things at 100 pace. It's just so much.
It's
But
bargaining
then,
over the loss, it's going to the past
yeah,
and
it
trying to
was.
undo things that might have
I was
changed the outcome.
I was going through that grieving stage. What they say, when you go through it. through a separation, a divorce. So I went to a psychologist. She was a Christian psychologist, and I don't know what she did. She just was talking to me and just flipped my mindset. She says, "Okay, you lost weight. Now you're looking good. Let's focus on that. Let's focus on you. Let's get you fixed." And I don't know what it was. I mean, we talked so much and about my past and things that I went through, why this is affecting me so much. And, I think I also have to do with the separation of my parents and when I was very young. But the good thing was she was not into medication. She didn't believe in that.
Fantastic. Good.
So she didn't prescribe me nothing,
Excellent.
absolutely nothing. And I tell you what, in 3 months, I felt I was 10 feet tall with $1,000,000 in a bank account, and I looked like Brad Pitt. I'll tell you, I was feeling good.
Right
I'm like,
on.
"Wow, what the heck?" So with no medication, none whatsoever. I that's why I think, you know, something is going on. I don't need a pill to resolve my issues.
Well,
Sometimes I
and
just
let's
yeah.
put let's
Quick disclaimer, we're not doctors, and this isn't medical advice. The opinions shared here are personal and not to be taken as facts. Don't start, stop, or change any meds without talking to your licensed healthcare provider. Always follow trusted sources like the CDC, WHO, and FDA.
put your experience, which is so important. It's got its own lessons inside of it. Let's take a look at that. But then let's compare that to some other scenarios that occur in depression, psychosis, and suicidal ideation. By the way, we do have a disclaimer, and it's clear that we are talking about patient practitioner encounters. We're talking about therapies and offering our opinions, but this is not a discussion to prescribe or practice medicine, to diagnose or to treat. We are both researchers discussing these topics. So, in your scenario, you were very, very in very good company. As most people who go through a trauma, I'm just going to say trauma, whether it's a heartbreak, the loss of the relationship, the loss of a loved one, the loss of a job. There can be, wartime trauma. There can be any number of things that create an acute trauma, and it can really change your brain chemistry. I'm not a neuroscientist. We can listen to Dr. Andrew Kaufman or Dr. Kevin McCairn discussing neurochemistry and the finer points of that science. But you knew that you were in an abnormal behavioral rut. It
Mhm,
was physically debilitating. It kills motivation. You stick in a rumination loop. You're stuck on the pain. You're stuck on the subject matter, and you keep going back through it again and again and again. I think that's very fascinating in a bioneural sense, what you're doing there, because you're building and reinforcing synaptic pathways. Going back
mhm,
to the hurt, you're building, it's like bringing the tractor back and forth and say, "Okay, let's go from a 1 lane to a 2 lane, now a 4 lane," as you build strength in that pathway. As you connect your thinking mind, the locus of your electromagnetic thinking mind, to that part of your memory that is traumatic for you. I think that's a fascinating discussion I'd like to talk, to a neuroscientist about someday. But you then encountered behavioral intervention and perspective of your clinician was all that it took, an outside perspective to pull you out of a rumination loop. You were creating real neurochemistry bias as you did that. You were feeling sorry for yourself, likely, and I don't mean that to be mean, but when we are stuck in grief, a whole lot of that is a piece of us that comes back from early childhood. Poor little me. Woe is me. Wham, wham, wham. Oh, I had to go to bed without any dessert because I was being a jerk at the table. We think we're not going to live from these traumas. And of course we do. But there's
mhm.
a part of us that comes back that says, if I can't have that, then I don't want anything. It throws a fit. but it doesn't make us lay on the floor and kick and scream and cry like an infant. It makes us stick in our quiet adult behaviors, stick in that rumination loop and keep chewing through it, bargaining, denying, all of that sort of chutes and ladders we go through in the grief process. So let's put your experience aside for a moment. Now let's talk about what's happened to a whole lot of other people. And this is going to be really kind of shocking. This is one of those things in medical anthropology I wasn't expecting to find. But as I listen and dig both into the materials of current researchers and clinicians, but also, very importantly, the thousands of people that have come before us that have said truths that have been covered up, I find that a large percentage of psychiatric presentation is caused by an infectious agent. And in my library, I created, I was kind of bowled over by the amount of citations available in that area, of different types of infectious agents that we can encounter throughout life, including perinatal, mother to child, that can affect permanently or long-term neurologic bias, a imbalance in our brain chemistry. And it is a true imbalance, and it can be a very dangerous situation. Let's talk about just one of them. Do you eat pork, Jeff?
Yes.
Okay. Do you eat chicken?
Yes.
How about beef?
Yes.
Do you know what Toxoplasma gondii is?
Negative.
Toxo was a disease that came into the public's awareness during the AIDS era. And there were some men that were suffering with in end-stage HIV disease. They also had a presentation of toxoplasmosis, which was affecting their brain. Toxo is a very, very durable and adventitious contaminating agent that can be found in beef, in chicken, in pork, in pets, cats and dogs and other mammals, and in person-to-person contact through fluid bonds. There are two distinct and important psychiatric outcomes that toxoplasma can create in a human being. One of them is acute depression. One of them is schizophrenia. Okay, so you just learned that in the domain of what we'll say psychology and psychiatry, there is a biological agent that is even found in viable whole virus form in our food supply, think undercooked meat, that can infect our bodies, transit the blood-brain barrier, take up residence, and then spend the rest of our lives influencing and biasing our neurochemistry. Did your psychologist ever mention going to get a test for psychiatric pathogens?
No.
No. Now, I'm glad that she was not prone to just throwing prescriptions at problems. I'm very grateful that
Yeah,
she did
no.
the work. That was that we call it, capital T, capital W, the work. You've got to do the work. That's the
Yeah.
work you did. And your case didn't have a biological basis in it. If you'd been struggling with depression and other just difficult psychiatric conditions. I'm not talking about an occasional mood swing. I'm not talking about getting blue when the rain comes in the fall and you don't get sunlight for a few days. I'm talking about a persistent companion. And people that fight this know that. They know that they're pretending while they're around people at work, people at church, people in their circle of friends and family who are laughing, talking about the TV show and the movie and the concert and this and that and the politics, and they're sitting there quietly struggling against a horrible feeling of depression, hopelessness, self-destruction. It can manifest and other things. That's when I say schizophrenia. The ideations there can not just be suicidal; they can be violent. So that is just one of the infectious psychiatric pathogens. There's a host of them, and we continue to circulate them through sexual contact and through fluid bonds. That means the use of human materials, blood and blood fractions that get transferred to other people. So that's an important little cameo about depression.
Yeah,
You've got psychological depression and you have biological depression.
I never heard of that, the biological one. Because you know what's really strange? Back when I was very young, my great grandmother lived to, I think, if I'm not mistaken, 105. But I mean,
She
she would
struggled.
cook her own food, and I mean, she would raise her own food, the chickens in the backyard. And I remember this, but I remember as well. She used to cook and fry everything on pork lard. See, there is some things that I just don't understand why back in the days, very early, when I was very, very young, and she would cook very differently. And I was like, why are we cooking this white thing? Oh, that's pork lard. And they would just fry foods with this and then they'll cook it. But this is, like I said, many years. And now you just get all these different type of oils that you get to fry, that you just buy from your convenient, your supermarket. But my thing is, why back then people lived longer than what they do now, and then they would eat certain foods that you would say, okay, that's you got to be crazy frying in pork
Well,
lore.
there
Is it
there
because that
are
they grow their stuff naturally? I mean, I remember having chickens when I was very young, chickens in the backyard. My grandma's like, "We're gonna have chicken." She would just go get the chickens and kill it. And
Yep.
I mean,
Did the other chickens watch?
they all run away. I remember when she tried to catch them.
They just all scattered. Well, because
They
they
all,
knew. They're like, "Hey,
yep,
she grabbed Betty the other day and we haven't seen Betty
yeah.
since." Yeah, yeah.
So I mean, I'm thinking. Somebody told me, well, first of all, if your family grew their own, foods and vegetables, and they had their own chicken, it was all basically natural. They weren't contaminated with by anything or injected by steroids or different type of hormones or whatever. So they're just clean and natural. And I'm like, you know what? That's true. Said if you go right now, you go to the supermarket and you see these chicken like so big and thick, like it looks very abnormal. But if you go for a natural one that's not touched by nothing, just by just regular feeding, it's very small. I'm
Well,
like,
let
okay.
me just
So it's
opine
not
to your question.
contaminated. So I'm thinking we were talking about the pork and the stuff and this in our foods. You understand what I mean? Where I'm coming from? Because
Well,
it's
let's go
yeah.
back to your question about her quality of life, her longevity, and
Hmm.
we can reflect on some of the aspects of her lifestyle that definitely could have affected that. And there are specialists on human longevity that will laugh at us for taking these very baby steps here, but pay no mind to that. We're having a conversation about a lot of different topics, and it's okay. We're going to swim under the lane line and talk about longevity. So I'm of Greek descent. And I hope it's not racist for me to sort of draw parallels between Puerto Rican local culture and Greek local culture, but let's do that. So in Greece, typically, and you may have heard of a book several years ago that got very popular called the Blue Zone Diet. And they went to 5 different, several of them more island areas, and studied cultures that had quite, without intending to, quite long lifespans. People live to 108, 110, 112 at the drop of a hat. And I mean walking down to the town taverna, walking down to the town square on a regular basis, being involved, staying up with everybody as whatever's happening that night, music, singing, some wine, all of that. We're talking living, not being tended to by an Alzheimer's caregiver in a facility. We're talking living their lives, chasing their chickens, cooking their food. So here are the things that we found in the blue zone that likely are very, very similar in Puerto Rican culture related to your great grandma. Um, Physical movement and
Mm.
a rigorous defense against becoming sedentary. Going up and down stairs, bending and standing, not heavy lifting. I mean, if I'm not, and this is not a pro or con of bodybuilding. We're not talking about bodybuilding. We're talking about motion that is affecting your lymphatic network. So as you use your hands vigorously, your arms, you're manipulating the lymphatic cluster at the wrist joint. When you stand and squat, you're doing it at the hips and the knees and the ankle joints. You've got this big spider web of lymph little pockets, like a big network. And at all of the joint points, you have lymph. You have a cluster, and as you articulate and manipulate the lymph and move your lymph throughout your body, it continues to do what it's supposed to do. Produce, strength and support for your immune response, be healthy tissue, aware if you get a cut and and a bacteria gets in there, you start getting red and swollen, starts getting infected, your lymph gland right there will begin to recognize that and help in the signaling process. So that's what the motion is about. This isn't about physiques or anything like that. Let's talk about her diet. She was clearly an omnivore. So she was eating what she craved. She was eating, her favorites, the things that she had been taught and knew her whole life. But she generally, you'll watch people who are successful at longevity gravitate towards their menu, their palette of, well, I get these vegetables and these fruits, and I have some mushrooms here, and I like these nuts and seeds, and these, this and that, and some wine, and this and that. And as you then come back to the present and listen to an amazing gastroenterologist like Dr. Sabine Hazan, who's, she's the darling of the gut biome. She has a great book called Let's Talk About Shit. Pardon my language, but that's the name of the
You're
book.
good.
She's a poop doctor, so I think
Okay.
it's a great use of getting away with swearing. But you come back and you say, why is that sort of instinctual but varied diet so important? And she will pull up the profiles of people who have a healthy spread, not only just of their C. diff, sorry, their BIF, but all of their beneficial flora, and they have fed it by this relationship between their gut neurons. If you don't know, you've got brain cells all around your gut. They're not brain cells. It's a neuronal network, and then it connects. Think of your spine like the center of the tree, right? It's the trunk of the tree, and your brain are the branches and the leaves. Well, your roots are all of those neuronal cells down in the gut. And by literally, you've heard the phrase your whole life, listen to your gut, listen to your gut. It's true. And when you have gut dysbiosis, you can create mood imbalances, thinking problems, brain fog, not to mention that 70% of your immune cells come from your gut lining. So Dr. Hazan would say, great grandma knows what the heck she's doing. She knew when she needed some more protein, she'd have chicken. When she needed particular seasonal vegetables and herbs and fruits and nuts, same thing. She would follow the seasons and there would be a good varied diet. And clearly, she wasn't practicing an overindulgence and she wasn't eating too much sugar, which will feed all kinds of problems in the body like cancer. She was following her gut. And that's all I should say about that, because there are wonderful, wonderful specialists who have made a career out of very careful analysis and articulation of these things, and we can learn from them.
That's very, very much true because she was basically organic in in a way of eating in her lifestyle. It was very organic. She would just raise everything and she would just work. I mean, she would just go out and do everything on her own. She'll work on the backyard and do her thing. She was always exercising. I mean, just like always,
Yeah.
like you said, the movement.
Yes.
It kind of like remind me like if she I was I used to think, I said, man, I wonder if grandma was Amish because it's like they're always doing something and she raised everything her food. No, I mean back in the day, I was raised very poor and my family's always been, on very on the low income end back then. and didn't have the privilege of going to any type of fast food restaurants or going like or eating out all the time.
Thank
Everything was
goodness, huh?
oh, thank God. Yeah, thank God.
Well,
Nowadays,
the
I'm trying to
oils you talked about, well, back in the day, I don't know, no, you're not I'm older than you, but your oils would have been polluted with glyphosate too. So all of the fried stuff in American restaurants, unless they brag that they fry in tallow. And if they do, they will put it on their sign. We fry in tallow because they're going to charge more for their fried products because it's more expensive, but it's so much healthier. But all of the sprayed seeds, the canola and the soy and the corn oil mixed together as quote unquote vegetable oil is so toxic. About a year ago, I was in a Twitter space and a doctor said, look, I don't know if he said he had quantified it or he had spoken with a colleague and they'd done the toxicology work. That's why I perked up my ears. I'm like, oh, they've done the math. And they said that every serving of a fried product doesn't matter whether it's a taquito or it's Mexi fries or it's French fries or fried chicken or whatever. At one serving of fried food from those oils, the GMO oils, has the same toxicity as smoking a pack of cigarettes.
are you kidding me?
One serving.
Wow.
And these guys did it. These guys do tox. They do toxoanalysis. They can equate, all kinds of chemical aspects of what's in the food, what's in the oil, the process of frying to a certain degree. They had done the lab science. That's why I say I'm not a lab scientist, but I know how to recognize the difference between an academic mouthpiece and someone who can back up their claim with actuals, with quantifiable data that someone else can reproduce. But these guys did the good work. And that was basically they call that a t-shirt size, an equation of A is relatively equal to B. And that was the weight is a pack of cigarettes. And I'm not a cigarette
And
smoker. I never have been. But
yeah.
I sure have eaten fried food in the restaurants before I stopped. I stopped some years ago, but I realized, wow, so many people, it's kids giving it to kids. Happy Meal. Yeah, with your dose of cigarette butts. I mean, I wish they would make a meme about that showed their science, and showed the chemical profile or the oncogenicity of smoking cigarettes compared to the toxicity of the fried food. That would be one of those really powerful A/B comparisons that people could, a mom can look at that and then make a better choice. No, you guys are having the coleslaw. I don't care. You can have the coleslaw, you can have the fruit cup. There's no fried food coming in for lunch. And if you train kids away from the greasy goodness of a fried whatever, we all love the taste and the flavor of a food that's fried because fats stimulate all five of your taste bud types. All five. When you bite into a greasy burger or a French fry, there is a joy that isn't there when you bite into a carrot, you
It's
know?
that dopamine
It's
that kicks in.
yeah, no, you literally feel better eating
Yes.
fats. And your brain is made of cholesterol, by the way, friends. So do not shy away from cholesterol. You will set yourself on a track. You can again listen to the neuroscientists today who are dissenting against cholesterol control. But the fats are so just like a home run. Everybody just sort of gravitate. Okay, well, we can have this or that. Have the baked potato at Wendy's. Have the Caesar salad. Don't get the restaurant fried things. I'm not talking about light pan frying. I'm not talking about tallow frying. I'm not talking about frying with organic oils. I'm talking about these oils that are sprayed throughout the life cycle of the plant, and then they are collected and concentrated into a frying oil. They are extra toxic. And it's all in the science. It has been for 25 years.
I totally agree because my wife and I, we changed our frying method. We stopped frying food. It's very rare that we will fry something. It could be like once a year. It's what we do is panadillas for the kids, but we mainly air fry everything. Everything is air fry, and I use the organic olive oil spray, and or I just rub things with extra virgin olive oil, organic olive oil, and just smear it on the meat, and that's it. But frying stuff on canola oil and doing stuff, nah, that's I kinda, like, steered away from that and fried food as well because it's so much damaging to your system. And another thing, you were mentioning something about the cigarettes, right? The doctor that one of those, doctors, claimed. I went ahead and according to ChatGPT, because I put down how many chemicals are in the cigarette, it says, "One cigarette contains more than 7,000 chemicals when burned."
And we're not
7,000.
talking about an organic tobacco, organic rolling
Yeah,
papers.
no,
We're talking about commercial brands that are
commercial brand.
grown at scale and harvested at scale and processed commercially.
Correct. Because natural tobacco, the leaf, I mean, it's totally, totally different. That's not containing anything. It's different. But yeah, 1,000. So you imagine that one portion, that serving, that one serves to have that amount. I mean, it's not that healthy. Not at all.
Nope. Now, I'd never like to demonize, particularly a plant. Let's not demonize tobacco. Tobacco, and particularly nicotine, and a number of nicotinoid compounds were studied during the COVID mania, I'm gonna say, and it was found in a great number of studies, not just correlatively that, these people happen to do a thing and they also happen to have less COVID or less severe COVID. There are biochemical mechanisms that were mapped, that were determined as to why certain types of smokers had less intense or less fatal encounters with COVID, and that was cigarette smokers, tobacco users in general. And they found out it was really a couple of mechanisms. It was the mucosal buildup, you say the smoker's cough,
Mhm.
and the same, and then there's a binding there's a very adaptive binding site on SARS-CoV-2 that can connect to a number of different cell types in the body. It doesn't just have one type that it prefers. Um, it likes the sexual cells. It accumulates in the ovaries. It likes brain and nervous system cells. So it has what's called a neurotropic affinity. It will very easily habitate those cells. So the nicotine, as well as some of the molecules from cannabis, have been demonstrated now to block the docking port. Think of the shuttlecraft coming into the ship. It's got to have that perfect alignment, get that little coupler ready, and then it's got to lock or it's not going to work. The same sort of interference can occur with a number of molecules, and nicotine and cannabis molecules were two of several simple, accessible plant molecules that were effective at lowering the efficiency of coronavirus docking with your cells. That would help it if you had, say, for example, and let's talk about that. That doesn't mean go out and start smoking cigarettes to avoid COVID. It
Yeah,
means there's a chemical agent in the tobacco that's beneficial. Guess what else in the plant kingdom has the second highest amount of natural nicotine in it? The eggplant. Guess which
that's right.
vegetable has the third highest natural amount of nicotine in it? Tomatoes. So if you eat a diet that is rich in tomato with occasional flourishes into eggplant, blech, I don't like eggplant. Um,
Yeah, me
my
either.
Greek ancestors are tisking me right now, but because they do a lot of eggplant. Um, I just need to have I need to have someone make really good, tasty eggplant recipes instead of what I considered, someone just puts it in a pan or puts it in with other vegetables in a roast, and it's just this big piece of it's like a piece of foam. I don't like it, but it's got nicotine, and those
Yes.
nicotine molecules have benefits. So that's the tobacco nicotine bit.
I'm gonna tell you something. There was something I was researching on, was vaping. One of my friends were vaping, and he showed me this. I forgot the name of the brand, but he showed me this liquid. He said, "This is what I vape," and I go, "Really?" He says, "But the nicotine is natural because this company is anti cigarettes or anti, smoking, all this and that." And I was like, "Really?" And he says, "But they get their nicotine from tomato." I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" So I thought he was messing around with me, and I did some research, and I'm like, "This is true. Getting nicotine off tomato and eggplant?" And I mean, I was in shock I never knew that. I never knew you get nicotine off of a vegetable and
It's
fruit. I
very
mean,
interesting.
yeah,
I mean, Italian culture, and obviously, we can make more food racism comments. Italians and tomatoes. Italian culture is so centric. So is Spanish culture. There's lots of cultures that like tomatoes, but you think of say a European archetype and how many tomatoes per year, per capita are consumed. I just saw a tomato consumption a chart, and Greece eats the most tomatoes out of anybody. Blew my mind. And I'm thinking, I wonder about the natural effect of nicotine in the diet in relation to um, domestic violence, petty physical conflicts in bars and tavernas, in the street. I wonder if there is, because of diet, some biases in behavior because of the neurochemistry. It's not because they ate a tomato, it's because the tomato gave them a little bit of a nicotine calm. I'm just
correct.
curious about that. I wonder I haven't dug to see if anybody has studied, psychoactive relationship to, say, tomatoes and eggplants in particular.
Quick disclaimer, we're not doctors, and this isn't medical advice. The opinions shared here are personal and not to be taken as facts. Don't start, stop, or change any meds without talking to your licensed healthcare provider. Always follow trusted sources like the CDC, WHO, and FDA.
But I know there's been a lot of study around wow, that's one of the interesting things about cigarettes and tobacco as a darling of science. Tobacco has a story that ties us back to the beginning of virology, and that's the mosaic virus, the tobacco mosaic virus. And they learned how to isolate it, they fully characterized it, and they even learned how to crystallize it so that it could be sprayed. This is back a century ago. That kicked us off into an era of virology that is now run amok, in my opinion. And we probably want to turn the corner to, some of the more serious research topic. So, in the papers that you saw about cancer, about biowarfare, or in discussions and topics that you've had, what is piquing your mind right now about that area? What comes to mind when we say biowarfare?
Well, I mean, geez, that was deep. I mean, mine was always the cancer because and the reason why because I had a small. It was an accidental finding on one of my kidneys, and they said it was a cyst. When they come to find out, it was actually a small tumor. They took it out, and it was a malignant cancer. And thank God above that it was taken out on time and then it spread out. But then again, um, I continue to um, to make sure that I drink my soursop tea because I was
Mhm.
like, you know what, I don't trust whatever that's out there, and whatever if I'm drinking something that I shouldn't. I started eliminating a lot of things. I eliminated sodas. I eliminated sugar. I use I instead of regular sugar, I is monk fruit mixed with stevia, and I don't even know if stevia or monk fruit. Well, I heard monk fruit is good, but I heard some stories about stevia. Some people say it's good, some people say it's not that good. So I don't know. But
I
I do
hear it all
take.
comes down to how it's sourced, how it's produced.
Oh, really? How it's basically made?
Yeah, 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 just like vitamin C. You can get a vitamin C that's sourced off of an E. coli. It's grown on E. coli. Or you can get a vitamin C that is food sourced. Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, you've gotta, it is worth, anything that think of your inputs as very important. Be the gatekeeper for the inputs into your body, and you're doing that. I don't mean to sound lectury to you. You clearly have turned the corner on, being aware of what you're eating and whatever inputs you've got to your body, what they're made of, where they come from, the possible toxicities and side effects. You're in a very good space. But yeah, that's one of those things about sourcing that's important to look at your manufacturer and say, what did you bother to do when you're making, like you say, it's a health product. Oops, with fatal side effects.
Yeah.
That's a contradiction. I just won't roll that dice. I'm now skeptical of health products, of all of them. And so that's why I look at sourcing, recommendations, how long have they been in the market, all of those kinds of things. So, well, are you ready to talk about cancer and the special virus cancer program?
Yeah, let's go ahead. Let's go for it.
Okay, I'm sharing a cover page from one of several artifacts that I have in a collection that I've been sharing now for many, many years. I've been gathering it, and I'd say in the last 5 years, the things that you've seen out on my Zotero site, all those different categorizations about oncology, virology, etc., those are newer. And those are really the mark of me maturing as far as record keeping and gathering the things that I had collected as single downloads or references in this manager or that manager, and finally put it all together in one place. So my Zotero is kind of my growing library where I will be adding and adding and adding. Right now there's 250,000 citations across many different categories. One of the areas of research that I was drawn into, because when I was a young man, um, I realized that I liked the big football players and the army guys. I didn't I didn't feel attracted to the girls. And I wasn't gonna tell my friends that. I went all through high school, playing the game. But I knew, as far as integrity and personal truth, yeah, I knew that I was gay. And at the same time that was happening, there was a horrible sickness setting in, and people were dying, and the deaths were horrifying. And so I grew up in an era that was, very, lots of people love the '80s and the '90s. There's a lot of good to it. But, for me, it was very, very difficult with HIV/AIDS. I feel guilt about being HIV negative. I have been a caregiver at the deathbed of a few people. I was never a nurse or a doctor. That would have been too much for me. But I helped care for some people. Excuse me. And, as a result, I began watching the language and the disclosures of our federal health agencies very carefully as the ACT UP movement took root. ACT UP was a group of primarily HIV positive men, in starting in New York, but then there were chapters in several other major metros. And they were confrontational, and they really, really gave it to Tony Fauci. It was not an easy era, but what I learned from ACT UP, is to question medications, question medical direction, and to become your own doctor. There's a whole lot about them. They were quite loud and obnoxious. They would do die-ins in the middle of the street. They did a die-in in front of the NIH. And there are many people in the COVID medical freedom movement who have looked back briefly. I see them, pardon me, I see them uh, capturing, screen clips of ACT UP demonstrations and making very, very loose inferences to that activism. But the point is that really set me on my. I wasn't old enough to be in ACT UP. I wasn't at risk of HIV/AIDS during the era that it was most prevalent in the community, and little was really known about it for several years. I was a kid, but I watched all of this happen, and I got my first taste of science. Then something very interesting happened, and I'm not gonna give the whole history of my view of the AIDS epidemic, but I want you to understand where this why would I look at this strange, material? Why would I become a specialist in it, and why is it important to public health? There was a very interesting announcement from a German doctor named Dr. Peter Duisberg in 1988, and he looks like the kind of lab researcher that you would just hang your trust on. You just like, "Oh yeah, this guy's an expert." You just believe him. And he came forward and said, "I don't think that HIV causes AIDS. It's all about this toxic lifestyle that these men were living. They use poppers, they smoke pot, some of them take crystal meth, they drink a lot of beer, let's look at that. That's why they're suddenly getting just gay men, that nobody else does those things, but just gay men in these specific geographic locations, meaning cohorts, communities, are suddenly in a temporal relationship to another event we're going to get to, presenting a new complex of diseases that has never been seen in human beings before and has never been characterized. We'd never seen an AIDS before like this. And that was Peter Duesberg's contribution to public awareness and then debate about safe sex, condoms, HIV, do viruses exist? All of that stuff, in my experience, began with Peter Duesberg. What I come to find out years later is that I believe Peter was a quite well informed and well managed red herring. He was an agent. He worked in the program I'm sharing here is the Special Virus Cancer Program. This collaboration occurred between so many agencies, we can't name them all here, and they studied biowarfare under a very thin veil of pretending that they were trying to find a cure for cancer. And
Mm,
if you just open the document and read the basics, even in these are about 300 pages. Each year they did a summary. You will find names, projects, universities, and most importantly is plain language. Not overly technical, all of the phosphorus that and the protease that not, there is some technical language in these reports, but these were written for their federal governmental handlers, for their leadership, not for fellow scientists. So they had to dumb it down. So, quite inadvertently, by bragging about their biowarfare work, they made it accessible to the man on the street. That's why I've been circulating these things for years. I'd say since about 2017. And I studied the work for many, many years before that. But to come back and put a bow on Peter Duesberg, as I understand, he's towards the end of life. And I couldn't be happier to hear that. You might think that's a horrible thing to say, but let me just tell you what happened when Peter came up in 1988 with his counterintelligence. In the defense intelligence community, they have a abbreviation for that. It's called COINTEL, and it's a real thing. You'll see it all over federal documents. I think Peter was COINTEL, and that was to just allow HIV to continue spreading and infecting and killing. because it sure did, and it sure does, up until the point where they have a Truvada or a prophylaxis that you take once a day to try and keep your viral load down. But people still die of HIV disease. But I think that Peter Duesberg, the red herring, who is at end of life, needs to depart this earth now, today, yesterday, because I watched as a kid who was just getting to know, some gay adults. I was, like I said, I was in the closet. I was in high school. I wasn't gonna step through the looking glass, particularly with the horror show that I saw happening with AIDS. But I began to meet some people here and there, and they started arguing against safe sex and against condoms. And they cited Peter Duesberg. And I personally know a small number. It's more than 1, it's less than 10. But I mean, people that I knew were HIV negative who went forward with the new information. They were armed with the new information, and they were athletic, and they were attractive, and you know what men want. They went out and they found more of that, and they got infected and they're dead. So I pin those deaths
Gosh.
on Peter Duesberg, who I don't, I don't have any reason to doubt my convictions about him, because in 1974, I find papers published by Peter Duesberg, a manuscript and many other items from his career publications, and he was employed in the Special Virus Cancer Program. And he was in a lab at Berkeley, California, and he was making his own HIV, we'll say oncogenic chimeras, virus hybrids that cause leukemias, lymphomas, sarcomas, and tumor cancers. He was inventing new biowarfare himself, but by 1988, he didn't think HIV was causing AIDS and tried to demonize gay men. And yes, there's party culture in the gay community, and I've never been happy about it because I know that it contributed to people getting infected. So, it's not a morality stance, it's a survival thing. I never could understand why people would value sexual release, that dopamine reward at the risk of dying. I could never stomach it. It's been very difficult for me, as you can hear. But,
Why do you
go ahead.
just a
Go ahead.
quick
Jump in.
question. Why do you
Yeah.
think it affected more the gay community than just the straights?
That's
People
the
that are not
punchline
into
we're
gay.
getting to. That's
And
the
I'm like,
punchline we're
okay,
getting to. It's really, really sad. It's
yeah.
really, really sad, and unfortunately, it's very, very germane to what just happened with COVID. Are you ready? During the 1970s, there were 2 major hepatitis B vaccine campaigns, and there was also a large, multi-year, 20-country African measles and smallpox vaccine campaign. The WHO is listed as an operative contributing member within the Special Virus Cancer Program publications. They were included and involved in the science that was developed. So it would appear from the epidemiology, if we're just looking at epidemiology, and that means the emergence and reporting of disease in relation temporally to another event, that African AIDS, the earliest cases which were described in the early and mid 70s as SLIM disease, SLIM, and they just called it that because of the horrible wasting syndrome that was the end stage of the disease. Uh, it began to be reported in the same fingerprint as, you guessed it, the 20 countries in that smallpox measles campaign. Then, New York City, about 1973, a cohort of many, many, many men, 1,500, enrolled at the New York Blood Center, the Lindsay F. Kimball New York Blood Center, for a hepatitis B vaccine study. Again, attended and managed all around by many of the scientists who were actively employed in the SVCP. That's what we're going to call that program from here forward, because it's a mouthful. Um, uh, the reviews of the surveillance of those 1,500 men states very clearly, and I think it's one of the last times that they make a very bold and clear publication that shows something went really, really wrong with that study. And by that, I mean deaths. Is they say that by the end of the 2-year surveillance window, over 50% of the men could not be located. Then here's the punchline. Think, um, think Deborah Harry and Blondie, Heart of Glass. Think Steve Miller Band, think, AC/DC's early albums. Think disco is coming to coming towards a crescendo. Saturday Night Fever. I know you're younger than me, so those things are all before you, but that was the moment in New York that they fired up the NIAID Men's National Hepatitis B Study. And it began in New York, and then San Francisco, and Los Angeles. And then they ran out the total number of doses produced by Merck for that batch of special hepatitis B vaccine by continuing to just offer hepatitis injections to gay men at bathhouses and at bars and at little drop-in, card table on the street in the gay neighborhood. Come over here and you can get a free hepatitis vaccine. They ran out the batch of 200,000 doses, including, as I've learned recently, a small retainer of that batch went over to Africa. And what followed from 1978 to 1981, which was the course of that NIAID study, is what you came to understand as the AIDS epidemic.
That's totally different from what I expected. Because they were saying that AIDS came from monkeys and it came from Africa from a laboratory. It gave me off like this another, the way COVID came about. Because remember when they first COVID came out, they were talking about, oh, it came from bats, and then it said it came from food and it came from something. And so AIDS, I was always like, where this came out from.
It's a
So,
combination of two viruses. One of them is from Africa, meaning it's from the chimpanzee pan troglodyte. That's another
mhm,
mouthful. It just means what you and I recognize in most photography, in most, nature and health footage as a chimpanzee, the common chimpanzee with that kind of pinkish face and those very expressive human eyes and the dark fur, who are just about 3% genetically different from us. They found this is part one of AIDS. They found by using animal blood to produce a laboratory product called anti-lymphocyte serum. I'm really punctuating a couple of these things for people that are going to look this stuff up. Anti-lymphocyte serum. That when they made it from chimpanzees, that occasionally anti-lymphocyte serum would leave the patient that they had administered it to without T cells. It would permanently collapse their lymphocytic community. This was a phenomena that wasn't consistent, and this is because anti-lymphocyte serum is used in a transplantation experiment. Now, this is horrifying. We're not gonna go to the island of Dr. Moreau, but there's a whole another compartment of this that I studied called medical primatology, as in primates, and that means the intersection of using a variety of primate species to create medical products, I'll have to say.
mhm.
Extracts, things made from tissue, things made from blood. And as soon as you do that, you open the floodgates to all of the zoonotically transmissible agents, things that are endemic and generally don't cause disease in the primate, that because of our genetic difference, we can become infected with very easily, and we then progress on at some point to a serious disease presentation. A lot of the herpes virus came across through the use of animal products, meaning primate products, to create human vaccines. We're going to have a show on herpes virus in my adventitious contaminants series. We're going to do about 3 shows total. We've done 1. And then we're going to move on to the herpes virus family next. And I'll make sure that you're aware of that so you can attend. We're going to do that on Twitter Spaces.
Oh,
Yes, I
okay.
still call it Twitter. But coming back to what is this? What is this white cell suppressant? Well, they learned when they made ALS, anti-lymphocytic serum, and gave it to a person, and then they would take a piece of the monkey, whatever, a piece of tissue, a skin graft, a tooth, and transplant it into the person. This is, long before heart transplants. This was the beginning of zoonotic transplant experimentation. And then they would watch. And if they gave, say, for example, let's set up a simple little scenario. We're going to take a molar from a chimpanzee and transplant it into a human being. Just it could be anything. It could be a tendon. It could be a hair follicle, anything. But we'll say it's a molar. It's a big tooth. First, we take blood from our target animal, our source animal that's going to give us both the blood for the ALS and the tooth itself, and we produce anti-lymphocyte serum. We refine the blood into ALS. Now, we administer ALS to the human recipient. Then we perform the molar transplantation, and we observe that there is a reduced speed to rejection. That's what they were trying to do with this ALS, was try to get the human to accept the transplant. And in doing these experiments, they discovered an entire catalog of new bioweapons. We're not going to go
God.
into all of the
Yeah.
primate pathogens that they found, but they were doing it. We were already doing it by using primates to make mass batches of CDC scheduled vaccines and giving them to kids and adults. That was already happening. Cancer rates were already climbing, as well as a number of other conditions that are exacerbated by the primate pathogens. But this, coming back to AIDS Part 1, and I shouldn't say AIDS Part 1, HIV Part 1 is the use of chimpanzee retrovirus. We can tell in the genetics from the first real master of HIV genetics, that was Dr. Gerald Myers at Los Alamos, to people today who all they do is just repeat the work of people before them and pontificate about HIV alleles and mutagenesis, blah, blah, blah. We can see that a huge part of our HIV-1 genome is from the chimpanzee SIV, the simian immunodeficiency virus. Now, fast forward to 1969. This program that we've got up on the screen sent a report and a funding ask, an appropriations request to Congress. And they said, we know, I'm paraphrasing here, we know that we can create a disease for which there is no natural cure, either in your body, your own immunity, or in pharmacology. And we think we can do this in about 5 to 10 years. We think we can complete the work. They were well on their way when they made that ask in 1969, and they got the appropriations. I have the full congressional record. You can get it at anybody that's got a congressional library. You can pull that record. It doesn't say, we're going to make a bioweapon and kill the blacks and the gays. It just says, we know we can make a bioweapon, and this is what it can do, and we just need this much money and this much time. Now let's get on to Part B. Part B, or Part 2 of HIV, is its fusion partner. Again, coming back to the genetics, as was demonstrated early in the 80s when they did the first full genome sequencing of HIV isolates from AIDS patients. There is a large number of sequences in HIV that are from a sheep virus called Visna, VISNA. Visna is another biowarfare darling. It wasn't a newcomer. Visna had been tinkered with and played with and fully characterized and what we call at the time fused. Viral fusion was their name for the process of recombining germ A with germ B and making a new hybrid germ C. So Visna was a compatible partner for SIV from the chimp. And they had worked again and again. The literature proves that they had practiced Visna fusion by infecting a great number of different virus cultures, meaning cells that already had virus in them. And then you infect it again with Visna, and they found that Visna could successfully recombine with other RNA microorganisms. We're talking about a very specific weight and size, like, a car matched with a car, the same model. But because of that similarity, they could recombine. So by the early 70s, they had successfully fused Visna with SIV, and they were beginning to adulterate vaccine lots with it. I think the first populations that got this new bioweapon were the African measles and smallpox communities, those that got vaccinated by the WHO campaign. By the way, interesting tie back to current day politics and people yelling and screaming about funding being cut. USAID is named in the papers and worked with the World Health Organization to conduct that 20-country campaign. And USAID is a cutout for the CIA. And yes, the CIA is one of the parties that worked at Fort Detrick during the SVCP.
Wow. So why would you think they targeted that community?
Have you ever experienced prejudice in your life?
Yeah.
Have you ever experienced someone chiding you by doing a Hispanic accent to your face to make fun of you?
I experienced that when I was young, yeah.
Okay. Do you think you have seen genuine hatred and malice between different compartments, we'll say demographics, different parts of the world, Christians, Muslims, Jews, blacks, Asians, Hispanics, whites, gay, straight, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, however you want to slice it? Haven't you seen increasing hyperbole and animosity in between certain clades?
Oh, yeah, I think nowadays you see it more than ever because of social media. 'Cause back then, there wasn't no social media in the 70s and the 80s. You couldn't go to, TikTok or Twitter or anything. So you see it more today because of the access we have on our cell phone.
Yeah, yeah. Back
But
in
I
the
always,
day. No, go ahead.
yeah,
Finish your
yeah,
thought.
I'm sorry. So I was always curious, why would they attack this community? Because back then in the 80s, to be openly gay, it wasn't that popular. Everybody kept it very hidden and it was in the closet. And it wasn't so outward like how it is nowadays. So,
Before the 80s, there was
mhm.
a revolution, and there are, again, fantastic professional researchers, academics, just amazing minds who have pulled back multiple layers of the onion with regard to the different influences that were nudging us in the 1960s and 70s. We're talking about heavy co-intel and influence, the FBI penetrating and usurping certain social movements, the CIA doing the same, certain agencies that we didn't even know existed beginning to spy and tap. The web around society began a long time ago, and I'm getting a little bit geopolitical, but to come back to your question about why would they do this? Um, in that era, you're right. It was still absolutely reprehensible to be gay. And the 1970s, every summer, the ice cracked more and more and more as more, we'll say, metro communities had they had a gay community finally that was large enough to have a pride parade. And they would start doing that gay pride parade and they'd put it on the news. And back then, the mayor didn't walk in the parade. Candidates didn't walk in the parade. Moms and dads and kids didn't walk in the parade. It was a lurid display of a highly polarized community. It made it look like our community was all about Leathermen, a extremely hypersexualized viewpoint of all of these people. So over time, it got reshaped. But what that original emergence of public gayness did was focus those who hated us on us as a demographic, as a line item. And I'm sorry to tell you that it wasn't just a phenomena or a horrible circumstance that occurred in the 70s. There is a very deep and important subtext to this called eugenics. And it goes back before any of this happened. It goes back 100+ years to the UK and to Europe about a certain class of, you guessed it, white folks who feel that all of these other line items of human beings, and I'm not just talking about the melanin in your skin or mine, whether we have black or red melanin, the morphology of our lips and eyes, our hair, I'm not talking just about that. They made line items about people who they intellectually, morally, religiously, and socially disapproved of. People who drank, people who they called feeble-minded. If they didn't like the way you spoke, your ideas, your personality, they could just say, you're feeble-minded, and then you could become a target to be sterilized. Did you know that by the mid-50s, we had 32 states on record in the United States that had active eugenics and sterilization laws? I mean programs to say your brother accuses you of being an alcoholic, feeble-minded person. And then by some court process, you are forced to go in and have a medical procedure and have your testicles, to be essentially unable to produce kids. That's what was happening in the United States. And then World War II happened. And then, oops, Hitler wrote a little book called Mein Kampf. And in the translation of Mein Kampf, you can read for yourself in the English how he praises the California Eugenics Society. Guess who influenced Hitler? Oops. American eugenicists. A lot of his playbook he took from them. And there was an interplay. There was communication. There were visits. There were ambassadors from the U.S. before things got ugly and before the war really hit, who were stoking eugenics in Europe. And it was definitely synergistic. It wasn't an American brand, but boy, we ran with it. You can see pictures of eugenics displays at the county fair. And they have a diagram of what the perfect family should be. And of course, all the little face dots are white, Jeff.
Wow.
Oh yeah. So
That's
there is a
crazy.
subtext. Yeah, this is not your grandpa's stories about African slavery, emancipation, and black-white racism in America. This is the granddaddy of that. They certainly have a huge piece of world history as far as racism and disparity and slavery, all of that. I don't in any way want to downplay that. And I'm not a black person. I'm not, I won't speak out of turn. But I will tell you that it was just a subcompartment. And that big trunk of bigotry and bias is called eugenics. It was also called Malthusianism. And now we can laughingly call them neo-Malthusians, new Malthusians, because Malthus was one of these folks who, just said, oh, yes, just look at natural selection. They tried to lean on the scientific emergence of the theory of evolution to branch into their eugenics quasi-science. And it wasn't science. It was in the same way that just tracking how you can cross a yellow rose with a pink rose to get an orange rose, that's about the quality of their science. They were cataloging personal familial anthropology, medical conditions, psychiatric conditions, things like that. They were mapping out family models of health, but their projections about what was good and right and true was pure racist bigotry. So that's that. If you want to go back and I think that's the bedrock. I don't think you have to go back to too many more layers behind that to see, oh, okay, this is how this thing began. It had to go underground after Hitler came out and said, "Way to go, California Eugenics Society." And the whole nation said, "What the hell?" And that's when eugenics got a bad name. Guess what the eugenics scientists became after that? Do you know the new title for their job in the lab?
No.
They became biologists. That was the new title for a biologist. And then they became microbiologists, and then they became geneticists. Now, again, like we don't demonize the tobacco because, of cigarettes, commercial cigarettes. We're not going to demonize research and researchers and institutes and discoveries and the progress of science that is in the light. But there are a whole bunch of those folks who are working for the darkness. And they have distanced themselves. They wrap themselves in layers of semantics. They separate themselves academically from what this really means when eugenics takes root in your body or my body or someone that we know and love. They don't want to get their hands dirty with that. That's how they stay, 6 degrees of separation from culpability. There's also legislation since the 60s to protect anyone who is willing to go into this dark domain of science and get a degree and work for the NIAID or BARDA or the NIH in one of these we're fighting AIDS, we're fighting cancer. And while they're actually saying that, they're doing something that's really advancing biowarfare.
That's wild. How it kind of like it all started. Man.
It hurts. It hurts your
Yeah,
heart.
it does
It
because
hurts your morality, and don't, even though it will expand your worldview, don't let it rob you of your worldview at all. If anything, it should make your virtues, your lessons, your wisdom, the love in your life, the goodness that you do instinctively through just holding the door for someone, helping your neighbor with their garbage, taking a cart back to the bin for someone in the parking lot that you just see standing there. Don't ever let the darkness that we're learning about rob you. It should make your light stand out in sharp relief.
correct. I totally agree. I totally agree. That is so true because, a lot of people would get contaminated and and then they'll start to think, try to be negative and you just can't. Now, especially nowadays, you just can't. Wow, that is really crazy. That is really crazy. I would have never would have thought of that because I
And in
always
this
thought that these viruses just came out of accident or something. And oh Lord,
No, no. And so you can understand a couple of major beats that are in the news every day today. You can understand why in 1986, vaccine manufacturers saw the big tidal wave of cancer litigation coming their way, as well as other disorders that are created by the adventitious contaminants in vaccines grown on animal cells. That's what we're talking about exactly. They knew that it was going to destroy them. They knew they wouldn't, they were going to go out of business if the awareness and the liability wasn't changed. So this is one major beat. They put in that Child Vaccine Act, and it gave them carte blanche. They were now indemnity. They had indemnity. They could not be persecuted. They could not be taken to court. They could not be held liable for the damage of their products. And now in the current era, you're seeing this weird wave of people denying that viruses exist at all. That, it's never been isolated. There's more and more. I think, oh God, they probably, please, just get worn out that nobody's gonna, you can go back to QAnon or wherever you crawled out of, but this is absurd There's mountains of reproducible evidence in the laboratory, in human infectious clusters, in person-to-person cases that have been tracked of infectious conveyance of an agent. And to say that they don't exist is like saying air doesn't exist, like electrons don't exist. Yeah, exactly. Sure, they don't exist. But that's another phenomena that I think is being fed. I think it's being definitely, probably uh, indirectly funded and coordinated through NGOs.
Yeah.
That's the glove underneath the iron fist of people who want to get us into a medical tyranny and a, digital ID tyranny, money tyranny all together now. But that nudging to make people like you and I have doubts. Well, this guy sounds smart. I see all these papers. I actually see the pictures of the viruses with electron microscopes. But this guy said that he saw, he heard a TikTok about, a fart in the wind, and so now I doubt it. If these arguments are absurd, and they'll anchor back to Koch's postulate, Koch's postulate, Koch's postulate, never been proven. And that's grotesquely wrong. That is fundamentally wrong. And so that's another one of these things you just gotta keep in mind when you see some very strange arguments, people that come in and pollute a town square discussion like a Twitter space, and just say, well, you guys think you're pretty smart, but viruses have never been proven to exist. I'm like, come here and let me cough in your face,
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's go down to the pneumonia ward, and I want you to sit there and read a book to the pneumonia patients without a mask on, and then
Oh,
let's check on you in 2 days and see how
yeah.
you're doing. I just laugh.
My grandfather used to say, whoever invented the lock invented the key. Now, that being said, do you believe they have the cure of cancer? Quick disclaimer, we're not doctors, and this isn't medical advice. The opinions shared here are personal and not to be taken as facts. Don't start, stop, or change any meds without talking to your licensed healthcare provider. Always follow trusted sources like the CDC, WHO, and FDA.
Okay, so let's start by not being the child who's trying to climb up to the top shelf to get the forbidden book. You remember that thing we wanted, and our parents would set it up high, and so we had to have it. That's reverse psychology. Um, we we know so much about cancer from decades ago that the public is just now the light bulb is coming on. Let's talk about cancer very briefly. What is it? It's multivectored. What it really is, in a number of cases, is your body attacking you, meaning a long subclinical autoimmune presentation. Some people call that inflammation, right? That's a very simple word. But we need to ask, okay, inflammation, that's a reaction. What's the
Hmm.
cause? What caused the reaction? Those are the subclinical infections. When I say subclinical, that means you got infected with something, either the way we talked about before, through a vaccine vector, through human to human contact, or through the use of a human product that was conveyed to you through fluid bonds, through a medical procedure.
And this is
And
not
so
talking
you
about genetics, right? I mean,
Now, here's the deal. Here's the deal. Many of these oncogenic, that means cancer-causing, oncogenic viruses, and we are also talking about RNA and DNA viruses. Think a moped compared to a bus. That's as far as we need to go in describing what they are. Some are very small, some are larger. They can live inside of the cell without going into the reproductive mechanism, or they can live intracellularly. They can live out in the bloodstream. But when you say cancer and genetic, that's one of the pieces of wool that was pulled over the general doctor's eyes back during this era when they were learning not only what was causing so many types of cancer, but they were continuing to allow it to happen by doing nothing. For 17 years, they were carefully seeing, look at this vaccine product. We're not going to name anything in particular because it's all about the cells. And the cells are what carried that original offense. they had the contaminating agents in them from the animals. And then the cells were used to make a variety of products, and then they were conveyed into people, and they persist in your body. Many of them can live with you for the rest of your life. So that's where, we have to look at the word. It's genetic. Unfortunately, we come into another word that's important to add to it. We need to snap them together like Legos, okay? Perinatal. You say, "Oh, your cancer is genetic." Well, you have a gene that's being expressed from your cells that is involved in your cancer mechanism. That's all you really get from saying cancer is genetic. But you can go back and pull the thread through the birth canal, back through your conception to your mother and father's lives, to their infectious burden. And
Mm.
many of those agents convey through sperm and through the mother's cells into the egg and into the baby well before, we talk about the magic of the placenta and all the miracle of birth. We're not here to talk about geriatric, or not geriatric, to talk about OBGYN. We're here to talk about the viral pathways and the infectious burdens that convey. And that's where perinatal comes into play. You can't think my cancer was genetic without at least considering that means it was potentially perinatal. And more importantly, what is it? What is the gene? That's when we get to the specifics. And you don't have to keep pulling the threads from that point. When you present a particular cancer and your oncologist says, "Oh, well, we're going to perform a biopsy." First of all, my personal opinion, I have heard a number of MDs and oncologists and other very, very powerful practicing clinicians and researchers give a poor opinion of biopsy because you are
True.
puncturing a a protective layer. Think of the chemistry, the biome around a cancer. If it's a solid tumor, we're not talking about a lymphoma, which is throughout the blood. But, in a solid tumor situation, your body will actually build an egg sac around that thing. And when you biopsy it, you can then, in the needle track, you pull the infectious agent, the oncogenic agent, and the cells that are already going out of control back through the needle track, and you spread cancer just by doing the biopsy. And you
Thank
can
God I
look
didn't
that
do
up.
it. I
Yay,
didn't
you
do
can
it.
look hooray, you can look that up in the literature. But let's come back to finding out about perinatal and genetic cancer. You can you can sample that cancer and find out that it had simian virus 40 in it, or that it had a human or simian variant of a cytomegalovirus. That's one of the herpes virus family. You can find that if you're a gay man in 1982 with those purple cancers coming out on your face and your neck, Kaposi sarcoma, that inside those cancers, those lesions, is another chimpanzee pathogen, a herpes virus called HHV8, and that was conveyed to the gay men who got the hepatitis vaccine because they grew it on chimpanzee cells. They not only gave them HIV, the bioweapon, quite deliberately, but they were able to also pollute the biology of the community by introducing all of those primate pathogens from the chimp cells. So that's where you can hit rock bottom with cancer. Don't stop with protein. Oh, you're expressing a cancer protein. Proteins don't just make themselves. They don't walk down the street and ring your doorbell and come in and jump inside your nose. Proteins are expressed by something, and that something is a microorganism. Either it's your cell that's got an RNA infection inside of it, so your cells are creating an autoimmune loop. Your immune system has recognized a problem in the infected cells, and that infection continues to spread and spread and spread, and so therefore does the cancer and the malignancy. But if you go after the cancer, you're trying to kill the reaction of the body to the underlying problem. Now, let's just be clear here. Cancer is not 100% a viral etiology, meaning it's not all about viruses. A great number of cancers are, but also you have electromagnetic and ionizing radiation. Yes, I'm talking about cesium. Watch your tuna and swordfish intake and do your chelation therapies. You can also have a complication, a cofactor of a bacteria. One of my founding colleagues, Dr. Alan Cantwell, was a dermatologist, and he was also a cancer investigator. And he published with Dr. Virginia Livingston about a pleomorphic bacteria, a multiformed bacteria, a shapeshifter. Do you remember Odo from Deep Space Nine?
Uh,
Yeah.
no.
That's a sci-fi reference that went right over your head. Okay. He
Yeah.
was a shapeshifter. He could take the form of anything. These bacteria can take multiple forms, and they are found almost 100% in cancer presentations, in addition to other cofactors like an oncogenic virus. Is this cofactor bacteria? You can have mycoplasmas in the cells that are not viruses and not bacterias. You can have direct chemical toxicity, asbestos, smoking, any number of other, there's so many oncogenic chemicals that you could have in your inputs, your cleaning, your cosmetics, in your diet, the plastics, whatever, there are a number of different vectors that come together to tip over your amazing natural defenses against cancer growing out of control. By the way, I want to put everybody at rest. You are all cancering right now. We cancer about 8 times a day. By that I mean you have some little spot in your overall body where cells are suddenly starting to misbehave and grow out of control, and your anti-cancer mechanisms, your P53 gene, other factors that keep you in homeostasis step in and calm the cells down. They move them to the death state, right? They move it to cell senescence and autophagy, and the cells are eliminated. So we're talking about some really horrifying stuff here. Never lose sight of the fact that you have the most amazing system inside of you that defends you today. There isn't a before and an after of cancer risk in your life. We are all cancering because of all of these influences, little bits of whatever the factor is that will trigger an ongoing greater presentation like you dealt with. So let me just park there.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, because I always heard that we have, cancer in our bodies. But the thing is if it decides to activate, we we're we're in big trouble. And I was like, man, is that true? And now that you're mentioning it, now I get it. Now I get it. So what are the things that you should do to try to like prevent it from activating? Is there anything? Is
Yep.
just like
Yep.
the
There's a huge list. There's a huge list, and we'll break it into categories because I know I've got a mouth that likes to run, and I have a big tanker of. Um, I wish I could say that this was Puerto Rican coffee. It's South American coffee, but anyhow. So yes, these are the preventative steps. That's what I'm all about. I'm an overgrown Boy Scout, and what I really care about after cutting through all of that horrifying science and history is the seed of light and hope that we need to hang on to. You can avoid cancerous inputs in your diet. That's a huge category. Start with organic food. And yes, there are naysayers and co-intel around organic versus non-organic. There are very well-meaning people who may have done some testing and found that things that are labeled organic have glyphosate in them. We're talking about this oncogenic herbicide that has become the number one cancer risk in a number of chemicals that are used in commercial farming. And they'll say, "Oh yeah, we anyway. Let's think about other inputs to the body that are important to minimize." I already mentioned your radiation. You can get cesium in highest amounts from tuna and swordfish because of their food chain in the ocean. We've let Fukushima, go on and on and on, and they dumped millions and millions of gallons of cesium-laden, cooling water into the ocean, into the Pacific. I've seen the NOAA studies. I've seen very good modeling about how long it took for that to just become ubiquitous around the world. And it's still strongest in the Pacific. But, there is no single ocean in the world that's divided. They all mix. So cesium is in fish, and that's one of the radioactive risks to cancer. So watch your and I'm talking every kind of tuna, whether it's fancy, really expensive sushi, tuna in a can, wild caught tuna in a can. So what? It's if they lived in ocean water, that's where the risk is coming from. Uh,
Mm.
Here's
Even
another
salmon
salmon have less.
have less, 'cause that's what I eat majority of salmon. I
Yeah,
do
get a
eat
Geiger
tuna
counter.
once in a blue moon, but yeah.
Get a Geiger counter and bring it with you to the market and wave it over that product that you're planning to eat and look at the eyes of your butcher as it goes, "Wee!" Watch. They don't do those tests. They're not aware of that. They don't do microbiology or environmental toxicology. They're butchers.
Mhm.
I mean, honestly, they've got a great wealth of knowledge about selecting and preparing a product, not what happened to make the product a product. They really aren't. So there's another tip is go to fussy food sourcing. If you live in the middle of New York City, I can only imagine that the competition it won't make it a food island. When I was in downtown New York in 2015, I was really happy to see organics and different types of restaurants sort of elbowing their way in, for their piece of the market, and there's obviously a demand for it. So, get clean with your food, get online, look up suppliers. I am not endorsed by anyone. I am a completely no conflict of interest, independent researcher. Nobody gives me a penny. I can't accept any pennies because that would expose me. And some of the HIV researchers earlier in this work in the 80s and 90s died untimely deaths. So I'm not going
Wow.
to pay that price. Yeah, their families paid that price and their loved ones, and I'm going to honor that cost by continuing this work. I build on their work, I validate it, I check it like an actuarial accountant. I'm not an actuarial accountant, but actuarial accounting means that you double check a detail through multiple sources. That's the process. So but anyway, let's come back to Cancer Hope. Cancer Hope, yay. So,
Mhm.
clean food. And when I say get online and find ways to save money from organic wholesalers, there are a number of amazing communities that have been fighting that fight for 30 years, ever since glyphosate, really hit the big time and started getting sprayed on canola, corn, soy, the grains, our breakfast grains, fruits that grows on a tree. Glyphosate is supposed to get rid of weeds. They spray it on the fruit.
Mm.
Why? Yeah, and by the way, organic orange and pomegranate peel dried in the oven so that it doesn't desiccate. It needs to desiccate quickly so that it doesn't decompose. It doesn't start to mold. But if you will take here's the recipe, and then we'll go back to cancer prevention. This is a recipe for cancer prevention, friends. This comes from a nutritionist who I know and respect. I just have seen very few people be as diligent researchers and then educators. She finds good information, she really checks it hard, and then she shares. She's constantly giving. Uh, but she pushed this combination for about a year. I saw her post about it again and again and again with all of the papers about the compounds that are in this tea that I'm going to give you. Okay, here we go. You get an organic pomegranate. You get organic oranges. Why? So they're not sprayed, because you're going to be saving the peel. Now, carefully peel your fruit. Set your peels on a cookie sheet. Turn your oven onto 200 degrees. Open the oven door and put your sheet in the middle. leave the oven ajar. Not all the way open, but leave, like a 4 to 6-inch crack. There's these little click stops, your oven the door will kinda stop. Leave it open. Don't try to bake them. You want it to be a quick dehydration cycle is what you're doing. Dry out your peels. Do not bake them to a caramelized brown or you will ruin all of the phytochemicals that you need. Just watch them to see that they have dried and desiccated. They sort of shrink a little, they crisp a little. They might discolor right on the edges, that's okay. But dry them out, watch them, and now pull them out and grind them. Grind both of the fruits together. Just chop them into smaller pieces, stick them in a coffee grinder, and grind it to a powder. You can be, very, very good with your stability and your safety by putting it in a brown glass bottle or storing it in the freezer. You don't have to. Um, it's pretty stable. But then you take a T-ball. Do you know what a T-ball is?
Uh, no,
It's
what?
a little it's a mesh ball. You can find it in any
Yeah,
any
the
kitchen
yeah,
section.
yeah.
Yeah,
Now, no,
it looks
yeah.
like a little double-sided strainer, and
Mm-hmm.
you just put your loose tea leaves inside of it. Just go and get a scoop of your orange pomegranate grounds and put it in some delicious filtered tea water and let it steep for 5 to 10 minutes. Dunk it, dunk it, dunk it, dunk it. You want maximum extraction of the polyphenols, and you will have an extremely potent, completely non-toxic anti-cancer compound. That's what we have to say. It isn't a medicine, it isn't a therapy, it isn't a product. These are compounds that are published in the literature repeatedly. That's why I'm hitting this so hard, is because it's affordable, it's simple, with a couple of tips, and anybody can do it. And you don't need to wait until you're fighting cancer or leukemia, lymphoma. You do it now. You have that, 3 or 4 times a year. Just remember, "Oh, yeah, it's Christmas time, all the oranges, not the sprayed ones." And when you are doing this, you should wash your oranges. You dunk them in boiling water and then rub them with a cotton towel, and that'll get most of the wax off. Um, it it won't inactivate or deter the beneficial compounds if you don't do that step, but if you're a purist, you wanna get that fruit wax off.
Right. Wow. Same thing goes with the. Does it have the same type of strength as the soursop leaves?
Oh, I would be speaking out of turn to do an AB, biochemical comparison. I haven't ever seen that. That's a great question. But generally, these polyphenols that we're finding in the soursop, in the black seed oil, in garlic are different think of cancer defense as a big pie sliced up into, 12 pieces. They represent different slices of that pie to make the shield for you. So their mechanisms are not generally exactly equivalent. And that's one of the great things about it is that you can do very affordable compounds, complexes that will be hitting different aspects and different mechanisms of how cancer is fooling your body, how an infectious agent has got a cloaking shield around it. It sends out a protein that it makes it look like normal cells to the rest of your immune system. Those are the kinds of tricks that these different things can do. And by the way, the largest of the viruses are called, say it with me, parasites. You didn't say it.
Parasite.
Para- yeah, I tend to think of the entire spectrum, and again, we're not counting mycoplasmas, molds, or funguses in here. We're just talking about parasites to RNA-sized viruses, which are the smallest, really as a single continuum. From something that's a a roller skate, that's your RNA virus. You need 2 of them, and you really need someone to be in the roller skates to be doing anything with them. That's a good equivalent to they can't do much on their own, but as soon as they get in your cell, they're happy. They got everything they need. All the way up to a giant parasite like a tapeworm that you can physically see that can be ginormous, can be disgustingly big. Um, I think of those all in one continuum. And and that brings us to probably the last and most important piece of, sort of re-emerging insight because people published about this over 100 years ago, which is part of why this is a big cover-up, and that's parasitology. Parasites are in our food. They're in our pets. Some parasites are in our sperm or in our mouths. So human fluid bonds are quite effective at conveying them. And unfortunately, most parasites are pleomorphic. They have multiple stages. And they have a very weird and difficult trick to overcome in treating them. This is something that I just learned from someone who is not I don't think he is he has an academic degree in parasitology, but by God, he deserves one from the depth of his research and comprehension of how to effectively actually get rid of the parasites. Here's the secret dirty trick they do. Do you remember? I know you know this one. Do you remember the movie Aliens?
Yes, I'm a big
Okay.
fan.
Yep. So Ripley goes back in to get Newt. Remember?
Mhm.
And she follows the tracking device and, oh, crap, it's just a sticky tracking device on the floor. And then she hears Newt screaming and she runs and Newt is just being, about to be face clamped by one of the face huggers. And she runs in and she saves Newt. And then they run into another room and Ripley looks around quietly and realizes she's in the egg nursery.
Yes.
Okay? Okay. That sets the table for what you're about to learn about the dirty trick in clearing parasites. If you're going to clear parasites, first point is of caution. They can and will release toxins. We're just going to say toxins. Let's not go into what that means. You need to have binders and good hydration to catch the toxins as they become free agents in your bloodstream, or they will just settle into your tissues, your liver, your testes, your ovaries, wherever, your brain. So you've got to have a comprehensive approach to how you're going to do this. They're going to release garbage. You've got to also include binders in your protocol. Step 2, coming back to aliens and the egg room. When you kill an adult population, which can be done very effectively, both with pharmaceutical and phytoceutical approaches, you will kill the adult population. Many of the adult populations have a survival technique that when they are dying and or exiting the host, they send a chemical signal and all of the eggs wake up.
Oh, gosh. Quick disclaimer, we're not doctors, and this isn't medical advice. The opinions shared here are personal and not to be taken as facts. Don't start, stop, or change any meds without talking to your licensed healthcare provider. Always follow trusted sources like the CDC, WHO, and FDA.
The cysts will remain in a hibernation state until they get that chemical confirmation that it's time to wake up and go to work. And that only happens when there's a threat to the existing adult population. Do you see how that makes it difficult to get rid of parasites?
Mhm.
As you're completing your don't go on TikTok for parasite tips. Go to professionals and ask these questions and say, what binders am I going to take for how long? Tell them about parasite life cycles. And if they don't know about it, they are not your professional. They need to understand this because if you've never done parasite cleanse, you are at a elevated risk. We started this show talking about Toxoplasma gondii. Toxo. That's just a little microbe. That's not a bug. That's not toxoplasmosis is almost ubiquitous in the population. Many of us can tolerate it without presenting a psychological presentation, but we also are still learning about it. So we're talking about big bugs, big squiggly bugs, and they're going to go, ugh, and they're going to signal that all of the eggs, all of the babies should wake up and go to work. So you've got to also have a prolonged plan. You've got to have, You got to have binders to get the crap that comes out of their bodies. And you've got to account for that Borg thing. They can never get rid of the Borg. It's always, oops, you got some nanoprobes in you. They leave nanoprobes behind, and the nanoprobes go to work. So that's that. All that is not that you need to take a highly toxic approach to it. Instead, you need to have a prolonged approach. And that's it. I'll land on
Wow.
on Nick's cancer tips, anti-cancer tips,
Yeah.
right there. Parasites are a huge part of the risk. And I will say this, that the parasites that are large enough to have other organisms, and I said organisms, inside of them also have heavy metals and radiation inside of them. They accumulate inside of parasites inside the body. So you kill parasites and you feel like crap right away. You might be tempted to stop your cleanse. Guess what? You were on the right track. There are things you can do to help yourself get through that, what's called the Herxheimer reaction. People would say, oh, it's toxic, it's dangerous. No, you are a danger to the parasites, and they are emitting toxins from their bodies, and you are responding to it. So you've got to support and cleanse your excretory organs, your kidney, your liver, your skin. It's good to do sauna, to sweat and sweat and sweat during this cycle. Occasionally, not every day, but to go in and help your skin stay clean, because that's where a whole lot of the heavy metals will accumulate. And when you do sauna, you have to wipe that stuff off, not just go and stand or sit and cool down. You're a sponge. It'll go right back into you. When you get super sweaty, get it off of you. Go out and take a tepid shower and get that salty, bitter taste off of your body. That's a whole lot of toxicity. And that's another thing that you can do to help your whole body deal with parasite cleanse.
Wow. Well, Nick, I could keep on talking and going hours with you, brother.
Yeah.
But
Well, we're 2.5 hours in.
yeah, we're 2.5, but I gotta get going here pretty soon. But can you let everybody know where they can find you? Where are your socials? Where any links, websites, or
Yeah.
anything?
Yeah, sure thing. I have really 3 hubs. One of them is media, and that's recorded podcasts like this. I don't post every single conversation that I've had or every Twitter space that I attend. Um, but the ones that are central to my research, I post on Rumble, and you can find my Rumble channel by searching for this phrase: 20th century medical anthropology. And as soon as you start typing 20th century, you'll see my little space cat logo. You'll see, Nick Petosky and 20th century medical anthropology. It'll come up in the auto inline complete. That's videos. There's a couple of documentaries in there, and there are a couple of really important foundational researchers who, like I said, I stand on the shoulder of giants. Um, Dr. Alan Cantwell, Dr. Leonard Horowitz. There's a confession by Dr. Judy Mikovits about HIV and the hepatitis vaccines. There's a couple of documentary type things in there that are very, very important. But most of them are my conversations about these kind of topics within the last 3 to 4 years. Okay, next hub is my Zotero. Zotero means driftwood. But Zotero is an academic collections platform. It's nonprofit, meaning it's open source. So I cannot be shut down. And anybody can have a Zotero, by the way. If you are a whatever, citizen scientist, researcher, MD, clinician of any type, and you would like a demilitarized zone to share papers. It's for academic citation. You could add a citation for books, for movies, for anything you want, but primarily people use it for the journal articles, for manuscripts. But you can organize it and you can share it, and it's free. So that's my next real hub. That's my academic hub, the justification for all of the words and protestations that you've heard from me this morning. And that is linked from my Twitter profile, which is my one and only social. And on Twitter, you can find me by looking for Nick Petosky. I'm the only Nick Petosky on Twitter. And my handle is at pizza pickles per with one R. So that's me. And like I said, you can get to the academic channel, the Zotero, from the only link on my profile. And I'll of course share that stuff with you if you're including it in the show notes.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Nick. It was an honor and a privilege having you on. And thank you. Thank you. Well,
Appreciate the conversation.
yeah. Okay, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in. You know what time it is. Till next time. God bless. Peace.
Thank you for listening to this episode on the Rascals Lounge podcast, and please don't forget to follow us on X and on your favorite podcast platform.